Hello, this is Haider Ali, and we're looking at Chapter 6 of Principles of Marketing 141. In this chapter, we're looking at a typical question associated with business buyer behavior. In this instance, we're focusing on the differences between business and consumer markets and why it's argued that these differences are not always valid. As you'll see from this question, the examiners present you with some relatively straightforward material for the first part of the question, which is worth 10 marks, and the second part is somewhat more challenging for 15 marks. And this should alert you to the fact that in the real exam, when you're faced with exam questions, make sure you read all parts of the question before you attempt an answer. Often you will find the second or third parts of a question are much more challenging than the first part, and if you're not able to answer the latter parts of a question, this can disadvantage you. So, looking at this question in more detail, one of the first things you should identify is where course concepts have been referred to in the question, and often this can give you a very good idea as to how you should start your answer. In this instance, what you may want to do, for example, is explain what business and consumer markets are at the beginning of your essay answer. This will help establish in your mind exactly what issues you're talking about, and for an examiner marking your script, it'll give them some confidence that you know the basic material associated with this topic. Regarding business and consumer markets, simple, straightforward explanations can be, for example, that consumer markets are made up of individuals who buy products and services for their own personal use or consumption. In contrast, when businesses buy products or services, it's either to use them as part in order to manufacture or produce their own products or services, or to sell them on to other people in the reseller market. So those are two simple explanations of the core concepts mentioned in the question. The differences between consumer and business markets that the question asks for are, for example, that the decision-making procedures in the two different types of markets are different to each other. In consumer markets, you may have, for example, the 5-stage buyer process model describing how consumers buy significant products and services, whereas for business markets, there's a different buyer process model which explains how the different stakeholders within the organization make decisions regarding purchases. In addition, demand by businesses for products and services is referred to as derived demand. What this means is that demand is derived from the demand for the firm's own products and services. So if, for example, a business faces falling sales, then the demand it will have for products and services will be commensurately lower. Finally, it's argued that businesses have professional buyers. These are people whose daily job it is to make purchasing decisions. And given the fact that they specialize in this, they often have specialist knowledge about the products and services that they're buying. They understand the specifications of different brands and products. They can relate these to the prices that are being charged for them. And they're able to make decisions, it's argued, on a fairly rational basis. By that, what we mean is that the buyers are able to access, process, and store a lot of information about different brands and products simply because this is their job, and they may even have professional qualifications to help them to do this. So those are three key differences between consumer and business markets. However, there can be reasons why these distinctions are not always valid. Let's look at the rationality of decision making. Now, rather than arguing that business buyers are rational and consumers are not rational, in reality the difference can be more likely to be that of degree of rationality, that perhaps the business buyer is somewhat more rational than the consumer buyer, that it's not a black and white difference. In fact, you could even argue that the extent to which consumers can be rational has increased over time, that the developments in information technology, the development and the growth of the World Wide Web, for example, has meant that consumers can now access information about different brands, different products, far more comprehensively than they could before. Previously, if you were thinking of buying a computer, the only people who could really ask about different brands and products were perhaps the salespeople in a store, or perhaps if you bought a relevant trade publication. Nowadays, things are radically different. Consumers can go onto websites which have reviews of different brands and products, reviews written perhaps by professionals, often by other consumers who identify what their purchasing experience has been like. And you could argue that this growth of technology and communications has enabled consumers to access, process and store a lot more information than was previously the case, and effectively they've become more rational as a result. As far as group decision making is concerned, you could argue that consumers don't always just buy for themselves. They can be buying on the part of others, and in this instance, a corollary of this is the organizational influences on business buyers, that business buyers are not just driven by the specifications of a product, its benefits and its costs. There may well be other factors influencing a business buyer, such as, for example, organizational influences. What we also need to recognize is that sometimes it's argued that consumers buy products and services on impulse, whereas business buyers buy products and services having gone through a particular buyer process involving different stages of information gathering, information processing, and so on. But what we need to recognize is that if you actually compare like with like and compare a significant purchase for a consumer together with a significant purchase for a business, there the differences in buyer behavior may actually be somewhat less. That consumers, when they're faced with significant purchases, may go through the 5 stages of the buyer process model, which would involve accessing information about a product or service, getting advice and information from other friends and relatives, other trusted sources of information, where they would go through a stage which involves comparing different brands and so on. And you would argue, as a result, that when it comes to significant purchases, consumer buyer behavior may perhaps be closer to that of business buyers, but clearly we have to acknowledge that where consumers are buying, say, a bar of chocolate on impulse, in that situation, clearly there will be radical differences between consumer buyer behavior and that of organizations. Another factor we need to remember and bear in mind is that an individual, when they're making a purchase within an organization, may well behave in a similar way to where they make a purchase on a personal basis. The traditional dichotomy between business buying and personal buying seems to suggest that people will buy in a very rational and thoughtful manner when they're buying for an organization, but will be much more impulsive when they buy for personal use. And it may not always be that way.